Hey everybody. I just wanted to pop in real quick and talk about something that I felt like I'd kind of skimmed over or maybe even completely skipped in some of the interviews that I've done leading up to this. And it really just involves going back and hitting on some topics that I feel like are relevant to understanding where I'm at currently in my own personal healing and development and all that kind of good stuff. And it's kind of the point of this channel that I have is documenting my own personal journey of personal growth, spiritual growth, um, healing, all that kind of good stuff. And it really comes back to I touched on the religious aspects of my upbringing, and I touched on some of the sexual abuse and stuff, but I really wanted to go more in depth onto that because in the last couple of weeks I've really noticed that some of the things that I've made excuses for people who more or less caused trauma in my early childhood, it's really been very damaging for me in the sense that I wasn't giving my inner child that ability to say, hey, this thing hurt me. I didn't know how to deal with this, or there weren't any adults around to help me make sense of this thing. And it's not it's not something to get sympathy from people. God knows I've had way too much pity and pats on the head and feigned sympathy and stuff. It's almost triggery for me. But I do want to put it out there in the sense that I want other people to recognize when they have inner child trauma that they've kind of been pretending really wasn't a thing. Oh, well, I understand it, logically as an adult. But did your inner child understand it? Because mine didn't. And I really, up until the last week or so, really didn't hold that space for my own self, my own inner child, to just have some trauma around things that happened in my life. So I'm going to share my story with you a little bit more in depth. I'll try to make it fairly brief so that I'm not taking up too much of your time, but I feel like it's important for you to understand some of the things that I didn't understand up until very recently. So going back, you know, as I talked about in my interview with Nicole, my upbringing was very religious, very isolated from the rest of the world, very small, very tiny. Lived in a small kind of Mennonite community. Went to a very small church where 30 people on a Sunday morning was it was a hustle and a bustle. It was just a really small world. It was a very safe world. So I can't say that it was all bad, but it was a very small world. It was very isolated. And at 9 years old is when my first real trauma occurred. Mind you, up to this point, my family dynamic was, my dad worked. He was a machinist. My mom was a stay at home mom. She homeschooled us. She had um, around the time I was 9, she had a part-time job. I would usually go with her to her job. It was a really stable environment, really. Things were pretty good in my world. I was a happy kid. Everything was kind of right in my little world. Well, at 9 years old, my mom took me over to my best friend's house, which was the pastor's kid. Um, and she dropped me off for a sleepover. Everything's great. Like, I get to have a sleepover with my best friend. Like, everything's peachy. Everything's good. What could be better? Well, the next day, my dad came to pick me up, which was really abnormal. And I can't recall off the top of my head. I feel like it may have been a weekday, so that was very abnormal for him to show up. I remember being startled by the fact that he was the one that came to pick me up. And I got in the car, and he said some words to me that I'll never forget in my life, ever. He said, "Mom's gone, she's not coming back." And my world was rocked, just like that. Mom's gone, she's not coming back. And at first I tried to fight it of like, well, where'd she go? When's she coming back? Like, mom doesn't go and not come back, you know? Mom always comes back. She goes to the grocery store, she comes back. Mom goes to church, she comes back. Like, there was nothing in my world that indicated that moms leave and don't come back. After a couple minutes, I started hitting this reality of what those words actually meant. Mom's gone. She's not coming back. And my little 9-year-old self, I'm sitting, we had an old station wagon, had a bench seat in the front. I'm sitting in the middle, right next to my dad as he's driving. I'm crying, pretty sure he was crying. We're driving home pretty much in silence after that. And I remember walking into the house and looking around, and I'm looking for her. I'm like, this isn't real. This isn't real. Mom's here somewhere. I just gotta find her. There's no way she left and she's not coming back. I walked in the front door, and the front door entered into the dining room area. And we had this big long table because we had a big family. And I distinctly remember one lone coffee cup sitting on the table. And I don't know why that's significant, but it's something that always comes back anytime I roll through this memory in my head. Just one coffee cup. And I don't know if that's because my mom and my dad were both coffee drinkers and therefore there should have been 2 coffee cups. I don't know what the significance of that is. And I walk through the living room. I'm looking around. I walk through our little kind of like homeschooling room. Mom's not around. Walk up to the bedrooms. Mom's not around. Come back downstairs. Mom's not around. And it really hit me. Mom's not here. Mom's gone. She's not coming back. And mind you, I understand in today's world that's a commonplace thing for parents to get divorced, but in my world it wasn't. I was the first, my family was the first family that I knew where the parents were divorced. I mean, our world was that small that any kids I knew had both parents. That was just how it was. And so this really not only tore my family in half, but it really rocked my entire perception of the world at large. Like, I just didn't have a concept of that. I was so isolated and sheltered that I didn't understand that this was a thing. You know, mom had always been around. And it really shook me. You know, my mom used to sing lullabies to me and play her guitar and read me Dr. Seuss books before bed. Like, I had a really good childhood up to that point. And all of a sudden, this main, very, very center stage character in my world just got yanked and was no longer there. And as an adult, like, I can look at it and understand, you know, my mom is gay. She was living with my father. We were in a very religious environment. She was not able to be herself, and I can understand as an adult that she did what she felt she had to do to be her authentic self and to live in her truth. And as an adult, I can justify that in my mind to a certain extent. But as that 9-year-old child, I had no perception of that. It was just, what did I do? Was I a bad kid? Did I not try hard enough doing my schoolwork? Did I say something I shouldn't? Like, why would she leave me? Why wouldn't she take me with her? And I think it was like, I don't remember how long it took for her to even call us. A lot of that time period of my life is very blacked out. But eventually she did start calling on a regular basis. And I just clung to those moments with my mom. I didn't want them to end. They were awkward at times because our lives had changed so much. Her life had changed so much. It didn't always feel like we had a lot to talk about, but it was my mom. And there was that part of me that was just craving that connection with my mom. And as an adult, just recently, it's come to my attention how traumatizing that was for my inner child to suddenly have this gigantic absence in my life, to have this huge shift in the family dynamic. You know, my father became a workaholic. My oldest sister came home from college to help raise me. My second sister, within 6 months or so, took off, moved out with my mom. My brother ended up, not too terribly long after, I don't know, a year or so, got a job. Like, everything changed. There were no more family meals. There was, the whole structure of the family changed. Everything about it. It just got completely shaken. My oldest sister and I started fighting a lot because where, I loved her, and she and I have a beautiful and tremendous relationship now. And we joke about this all the time. But where we had this relationship, if she had always kind of been my mom, my second mom to begin with, all of a sudden she's taking this role, and I resented her for trying to take on that role, even though it was very much intended to be beneficial for me. I resented it because I just wanted my mom. My brother, after he started working, I was probably closest to him for quite a while because he would come home from work or whatever, and he'd come in and he'd be all excited. He'd be like, let's get in the car. Let's go. We're going to go somewhere. I'd be like, where are we going? Where are we going? Little young me, all excited. Where are we going? And he'd take me down to Dairy Queen and we'd get blizzards, or we would go down to the little basketball court down the street and we'd shoot some hoops and go wash his car. We did things that were very in the moment. And I really loved those moments that I got to spend with my brother. And then at about 12 years old, I'm like prepubescent at that point. Only have one parent who's a workaholic. The whole family dynamic is all messed up at that point. My father starts molesting me. And I know I talked briefly about the sexual abuse in one of my other interviews, actually both of them, I think. Um, but I didn't really name who it was. It was my father. And I think it's important to say that because of the fact that it puts into perspective, this wasn't just some rando. This wasn't somebody that I barely knew. This wasn't an uncle that visited on occasion. This wasn't a neighbor who I didn't see every day. This was my father who I lived in the same house with. This was my father who was my only other parent after my first parent had left me, and therefore I'm clinging to him extra hard. And that really messed some things up for me in my head of feeling like I had maybe been a bad child or something like that that had driven my mother away, and therefore wanting to people please even more. And then having a father who's sexually abusing me. And I oftentimes try to play that down and compare it to other people's abuse, because realistically, the abuse that I went through was nothing compared to some of the horrific things that other people have gone through. I was not physically damaged by this. It was all psychological, it was all emotional. But I've gotten to a point now where I can understand that this is my story, and it doesn't have to be as traumatizing as somebody else's. It was traumatizing to me at that point, especially with the way that I was brought up. It was incredibly traumatizing. We were very unprogrammed when it came to sexual things. At that point in time, I didn't know about the birds and the bees. I knew that women got pregnant. That much was obvious. I didn't really know the mechanics of how it worked. There were times that I would literally sit there and beat on my stomach, thinking that the things he had done to me would get me pregnant, which they wouldn't have. But that was my lack of understanding. That was how it manifested. I was literally beating myself physically, thinking that, just not knowing, just not understanding, not fathoming what was even going on, not having any programming, any knowledge to understand this or wrap my head around it at all. And it tended to happen on days where my brother and my sister were off doing church ministries. And so I got really resentful of these ministries. And I would often act out on days when I knew, Saturdays my brother and my sister would go off and they would visit with some of the local kids from apartment complexes and stuff, and try to invite them to church, get them to come to church on Sunday. And they were working on this kind of bus ministry. And I would do things to sabotage them covertly, and they didn't really understand why. My brother would want to play basketball with the kids at this apartment complex, and I'd hide my basketball, and he'd get a little upset because I'd hidden my basketball, and he didn't understand why. But I didn't know how to talk to them about this. I didn't understand what was going on, much less have the boldness to speak to my siblings, who I had assumed probably wouldn't be able to do anything about it anyway. And then my dad started taking more time off of work and making these special Saturday trips to the beach where it was just him and I. And there was that child part of me that just wanted to spend time with my dad. But then the abuse would happen, and it was very confusing. At one point, I tried to speak out about it, And I didn't know if I could really explain what was going on. And I felt really guilty and dirty about it. One of the things that I knew that he was doing is I knew that he was drinking, and the environment that we grew up in, drinking was a really bad thing. But when he had been sexually abusing me, he would often go to his bedroom closet, and on the top of his closet, he would have a bottle of booze, and he would take a sip out of it and come back. So I had decided I was going to talk to the pastor's wife and tell her that I thought my dad was drinking. And I set an alarm. I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning one morning. I had these tiny little empty vials from a chemistry set. And since I couldn't go into his room and grab this bottle and pour a little bit of it into the vial, I knew that he also kept some like cooking wine or something like that in the kitchen cabinet. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm the only one up in the house. I'm trying to be super quiet. I'm tiptoeing around. I get into the kitchen cabinet. I get out this bottle of like, I think it was like white port or something like that. I pour a little bit of it into a vial, put it back in the cabinet. I washed the funnel that I'd used, dried it, put it back where it belonged, cleaned everything up so there was no evidence that I had even done it. And the next day at church in the morning, I approached the pastor's wife and I told her, hey, I think my dad's been drinking. I got this little vial. Can you smell it and tell me, if it is alcohol? And she kind of takes a whiff of it and she's like, oh, yeah, that's alcohol. So she takes it to her husband, the pastor, who was my dad's best friend. And it was a Sunday morning after the sermon. He pulls my dad into the office, and I don't remember how exactly it went down, but basically my brother and my sister ended up going back on the bus route to drop off the kids at their apartment complexes. And my dad had specifically told me, I'll drive you home. You stay here, I'll drive you home. And I'm freaking out. I know the conversation he's having in this office with the pastor. And I'm freaking out. I'm trying to act cool. I'm trying to act normal. He comes out of the office and he's laughing and cutting up with the pastor. And we get into his truck. And instead of going home, he drives a different way. And there's this 2-lane bridge going across a river, completely out of the way of our house. And there's a maintenance bridge that is separate from the main bridge. He drives off on this little side road onto the maintenance bridge, and he parks right in the middle of it. And he tells me I am not ever to speak of the things that he has done to me. That I will be viewed as dirty. That I am the one who came onto him. And more or less, at that point in time, it felt like my own father was threatening to kill me. There's a quickly moving river underneath of this bridge. And my father is telling me I am not allowed to talk to anybody about what he's been doing. Because he knew. I think he knew that I was trying to work up the courage. If I could tell them that, then I could tell them more. And so he wanted to nip it in the bud real quick. And I just remember being paralyzed. That this thing that I had planned out that was supposed to help me get free of this situation not only didn't work, but backfired on me. And I was scared. I didn't have any other bright ideas of how to fix the situation at that point. I had no idea there even was such a thing as CPS. I didn't have anything else that I knew about to get out of that situation or anybody else that could help me. I didn't even know enough to know how to explain what was going on. And the adult part of me wants to say that my father in other areas of life is a philosophical man, taught me some good things, but the child part of me just feels utterly betrayed. That my own father would use me as an object of his own satisfaction. So shortly after my mom had moved back to the area, and I wanted to move in with her. I wanted to be free of my circumstances. I wanted to be back with my mom because God knows I'd missed her. And I didn't know how to tell my dad, so I left him a note on his bed telling him that I wanted to move in with her. I wasn't legally at the age where I could make that decision myself without his approval, but I just let him know that that was what I wanted to do in this note. And he didn't fight me on it. I moved in with my mom. My brother came to see me a few times, and she was getting ready to move, and it was part of why I wanted to move in with her, is because I knew she was getting ready to move away again, and I couldn't handle the thought of my mom leaving again. So I moved in with her shortly before this move took place, and we were living in Virginia at the time, and she and her girlfriend were going to move to Idaho, from Virginia to Idaho. And I lived with her for several months. The schooling issue came up, and basically she was going to put me in public school, and I was so incredibly terrified from all my programming and the upbringing that I'd had and everything. I thought the public school system was the devil, and I got terrified, and I said, no, I'm going to move back home with Dad. My dad came and picked me up, and by that time he had gotten into a serious relationship with somebody and was seriously considering marrying her. And I believe it was on the trip back to Virginia that he asked me how I would feel if he married her. And part of it was the trauma brain talking of like, well, if he's married to her, then he's going to leave me alone. So heck yeah, I'm on board with it. So the summer of me being 13, he married my stepmom. And I believe it was that fall she got into a really bad car accident. Tore her rotator cuff, and she was left-handed. It was her left arm, so it was, kind of left her very at a disadvantage. She was an elementary school teacher, so she had been used to helping students learn to write with the right hand, so she wasn't completely off guard, but it was a struggle for her. The church came together really quickly after the accident, and everybody was bringing over casseroles and prepping meals for us and stuff. And the first night that nobody had brought us a meal, I remember hearing pots and pans banging around down in the kitchen, and I thought, well, that's really weird, like she shouldn't be cooking. And so I went downstairs. This is me at 13. I'd never had a lick of responsibility in my life. Wasn't even doing my schoolwork at this point in time. So, like, I had no responsibility at this point in my life. I go into the kitchen. I see her stirring a pot of something with her right hand. And I'm like, do you want help? I'm baffled. Like, she's trying to cook dinner with her non-dominant hand, and she's all pissed off. No, I don't need any help. I'm like, okay. You seem like it might be helpful, but you seem angry, so like I'm gonna go back upstairs. Like I don't know what to do. I'm 13 years old and she's getting mad at me for offering to help when she's trying to cook dinner one-handed with her non-dominant hand. Like I'm like, I feel like I should be helping, but you don't seem to want me to. So I was just like, get out of there. I'm like, I don't know what to do. Well, this goes on for a couple of days. And finally I asked my dad, every day I'm coming downstairs. As soon as I hear her in the kitchen, I'm coming downstairs. Can I help? What can I do to help? I'm rearranging the wording. Can I give you a hand? Can I do something for you? Like, I'm trying to figure out, how do I approach this lady and offer assistance. I don't know what she's trying to do, so I can't just jump in and do it for her. I'm trying to offer. She's not taking my offer, but she's seeming mad at me at the same time. Like, I don't know what you want from me, lady. I finally talked to my dad and I'm like, Dad, what's going on with her? Like, I'm offering to help. She's not taking it, but she seems mad at me. I don't feel like she should be doing it by herself. What do I do? And he talks to her and he's like, well, she's mad at you because when she was 9 years old and her mom passed away, she, even as the youngest child, jumped in and started cooking meals for her family and taking care of her whole family. And she feels like you should do that. I'm like, I can cook a microwavable pizza. I can make some top ramen. I mean, I could make mac and cheese if I read the box, but like, I don't know any of this. I've never cooked a meal in my life. And she's getting mad at me for not making a full-blown meal for 3 people. Like, and then for a while there, I feel like it was, I don't know if it was before or maybe after this, she was helping me with my schoolwork. I hadn't been doing school in a while. I had the curriculum and everything, but I wasn't doing it. And she was an elementary school teacher. She had this time. And so we got to a point, we were getting along and everything. And so I would bring my books downstairs and she would kind of set out kind of a lesson plan for me for the day of, I'd like you to read this chapter and do this work and everything. Like, okay. And I'd sit at the dining room table and I'd do my work. a little ways into that, I mean, not very long at all, I don't think, but maybe a couple of weeks at most, I come downstairs. She's not down there. I've got my school books. I'm ready to go. She's not there to give me my lesson plan for the day. I'm like, this is weird. So I go and I hunt her down, and she's doing something else. I'm like, what do you want me to do today? Blah, 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 blah. Kind of blows me off. Like, okay. So I sit at the dining room table. I do my work. Kind of confused as to what's going on. This happens for a few more days. And finally, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. Why is she not coming up here and telling me what she wants me to do? Why do I have to go search her out to find out what my lesson plan is for the day? She wanted to be involved in this, and all of a sudden she's just completely disappeared. So I go back and I talk to my dad again. What the heck is up with her? Oh, well, she's mad because she doesn't feel like you're giving her 100%. I'm like, bitch, I haven't given 100% in a long time. If she wants me to give 100%, she's got to motivate me. She's got to put some fire under my butt, not throw her hands up in the air and walk away, because that makes me really not want to give any more effort to it. I'm 13 stinking years old. How much motivation am I supposed to have naturally? Come on. But she just like gave up and walked away. And then our relationship just got so strained. So then it was basically she ended up healing up from her injuries, went back to work. My dad was working. I was sitting at home by myself all day long, every day. Church was my only outing on Sundays and on Wednesday nights. That was the only time I got out of the house. We ended up moving into town. Like before, we lived in the country and I could go wander around and play and do some chores and stuff. But we moved into town. There was a college close by, so it was kind of a crazy place. I basically lived in my room from the time I was 13 to the time I was 17 and finally moved away. I didn't get out. I didn't have things to do. I mean, when I was bored enough, I would sit there and putz around with my schoolwork, but for those 4 years, my stepmom, almost every day, I mean, I made it a point as often as I could, and I was pretty damn consistent with it, I think, that when I heard her in the kitchen, I would go out there and I would ask her if I could help. For 4 stinking years. Can I help you with dinner? Is there something I could do? Would you like a hand? I reworded that thing so many freaking times, I don't even know how many alterations I came up with for asking if she wanted some stinking help. Nah, I got it. Nah. Wouldn't freaking let me help her. It became my job to clean up after dinner, which ended up also, being not only do you clean up the dishes and put away the leftovers, wash the dishes, you also wipe down the table and you sweep the floors every stinking night. And you better have it done by 11 o'clock, even if your dad gets home at 10 o'clock. Doesn't matter. Can't have you banging around pots and pans in the sink when we're trying to sleep. Oh, you freaking precious. 4 years. 4 years. I didn't give up on her. I kept coming back and trying to help. And she never stinking let me. And you know how many issues I have as an adult with sitting down and trying to cook a meal? Being in a kitchen is so stinking triggery for me. And it's funny because as an adult, I have made so many excuses for these things that have been traumatic. I have not given them the proper place. I have not given my inner child the ability to speak about how it felt in that moment. to be a child and be gaslit and ignored and talked down to by an adult who prided herself in being a teacher of elementary school students, but she was shit to me. My inner child did not feel good about that. And looking back as an adult, I get it. I'm portraying it from my own perspective now, and I'm being a little sassy tonight, so I apologize. But coming back to the feeling of it all, my mom left me. My father sexually abused me and then married a woman who hated my guts. From the time I was 9 to the time I was 17, my life was a shit show. And up until the last few weeks, maybe the last month or so, I have not had the accurate perspective to look back on that and realize how traumatic it was on my inner child to go through those experiences, to try to understand them and to try to process them and to try to be the adult in the situation. When I was 16, I believe, maybe early 17s, my dad actually came to me and asked me if he wanted me, or if I wanted him to leave my stepmom to get me out of the situation because it was so bad for me. And that we would go and we would move out and he would basically move back in with her once I was off to college and had moved out on my own. Like, he literally gave me the ability in that moment to break up his marriage because of how bad she was being to me. And I was the adult in that moment. I was the one that had to tell him, no, it's okay. I can handle it. A few months, a year, I'm going to be out of here. I'm going to go away to college. Like, why would you continue to support her and try to rent like a place for us and then go back to her? Like, it's fine. It's fine, Dad. Just stay with her. Whatever. I can deal with it. The point I'm making, or kind of the direction that I'm trying to take this conversation, really is not about, it's therapeutic for me to let people know what happened to me. It's very therapeutic to talk about it. But the purpose of this is to encourage people to look at their life experiences from the perspective of the child that was having them and not the adult that's justifying the behavior. I can justify as an adult that my mom needed to be somewhere where she could grow and she could be herself. But as a 9-year-old, I didn't understand that. And as a 9-year-old, that hurt me. That was traumatic for me. I don't hate her for it. She needed that. Was it done the best way? For her at the time, maybe it was. For me, no. Can I project my needs onto her and make her whole life revolve around me? I don't know. But the point is, at 9 years old, I didn't understand. And at 9 years old, that was very traumatic for me. So as I'm looking at myself now as an adult and having issues with regulating myself, having issues with unhealthy coping mechanisms, codependency issues, falling into narcissistic empath archetypes, the whole 9 yards, when I really sit there and sit with it, it comes back to traumas from my childhood that I have spent my whole life justifying the people who did those things to me, and not holding space for my own inner child, and not allowing myself to feel the impact that that had on me. So I just want to encourage everybody, just because something is justifiable in your mind, just because you can understand why it may have taken place, or why a parent or a sibling or somebody may have needed to do something for themselves, don't disregard what your inner child felt because of it. Because that inner child can get to a point where it's really running your life, where a conversation you need to have with your boss becomes so difficult because your inner child is saying, we don't have a voice, or we're not worthy of that raise that we're going to ask for. And it gets to a very unhealthy point. And that's something that, in all honesty, I'm dealing with a lot right now. I've gotten myself into a situation that seemed beneficial at the time, that has proven to be very unhealthy. And it just so happens that I got myself into a pickle where it's difficult to get out of. And the answer seems to be in my own childhood and my own inner child healing, in recognizing my self-worth, in gaining my voice back, in telling my story, and getting empowered, and reparenting my own inner child, and saying, we don't have to feel that anymore. We don't have to feel abandoned. We don't have to run through these mental replays of our father sitting there and saying his stock line of, you're just like your mother. Why can't you communicate with me? I'm trying desperately to communicate with you. Why won't you say anything? Geez, I wonder why my throat chakra's blocked. Some of these issues that we have as an adult, in fact, probably a lot of them, come back to childhood beliefs, come back to those influential core beliefs about ourselves. Whether it's that we believe that we're stupid, we believe that we're ugly, we believe that we're bad communicators, we believe that we don't have any worth in and of ourselves unless we're doing certain things or making people happy. There are so many damaging things, and I don't think that enough of us really sit down and spend the time to evaluate where these things come from. And if we did, I think we would discover that a lot of them come from childhood. And as much as I don't like the Dr. Spock type psychology of, everything results from improper potty training, there is a lot to be said about early childhood development and the things that we needed as children that we didn't get. And that doesn't mean that your parents weren't loving. They could be loving parents, but not giving you the type of discipline and structure that you need in life. They could be disciplined and structured, but not giving you the kind of love that you need in life. There are so many different facets of who we are and what we need. And it is incredibly limiting to think that just because we had kind of a picture perfect type family on the outside, that we didn't have any trauma that we didn't have things that were missing. Especially when we look at our parents. I mean, I think all of us could probably look at our parents and see some area in which they had their own trauma. And this is where we need to set this right. You know, I think that there's a history in my family of sexual abuse beyond just my own, prior to my own. And I have determined that the buck stops here. Period. End of discussion. It stops with me. It goes no further. We have ancestral traumas, we have ancestral patterns, and it is up to each of us to recognize them, to heal our own inner child, so that when we have children, so that when we are going out into the world and interacting with other people, that we are not furthering that trauma, that we are not giving it more amplitude to affect other people, that we take it, we transmute it, we overcome it, we deal with our own inner child, we help our own inner child, we heal our own inner child, so that we can become healthy enough adults that we don't inflict this kind of trauma on the next generation. If we achieve nothing else in life than not passing on the ancestral trauma that is in our lineage, that is something that cannot be bought, it cannot be traded, it cannot be valued. It has to stop. We have to deal with our stuff. We have to deal with our family stuff. And going forward, we have to heal. We have to plant our feet firmly and say it goes no further. Whether it be abandonment, sexual abuse, gaslighting and ignoring children, it goes no further. We're going to heal our own wounds. And when we go forward and raise the next generation, we're going to raise them without projecting our own trauma and our own woundedness onto them. And we're going to let them grow up genuinely pure and free and true to themselves without all this. We've got to stop it. The children are precious. They've always been precious. And right now there's an entire world full of very, very wounded children. We can't let it keep going on. And that involves starting with ourselves first. Looking at our own self. Seeing and admitting the things that have hurt us, that have created unhealthy patterns in ourselves. Fixing them. And moving forward with the understanding and the wisdom that we've gained from that to help the next generation come up in a truly healthy way. Because I think we're all sick of it, honestly. I think we're all sick of the woundedness. We're all sick of the trauma, the acting out because kids don't know any better, or they're trying to get attention because they've been hurt. The world right now is one gigantic cry for help in a lot of ways. And that should break our hearts. And if we truly want to help it heal, we need to heal ourselves first. So do me a favor. I won't keep you any longer, but sit down with yourself. Give yourself a few minutes to go back to your childhood and recognize where traumas occurred. Don't make excuses for the people who caused them. It's not about a blame thing. It's about understanding what your inner child felt in that moment and recognizing it, acknowledging it, understanding it, and working on healing it. Recognize if there were things that you needed that you didn't get. Maybe you had a single parent, and that's, as an adult, we can understand that, but as a child, you don't. There's a neglect there. There's an element of having to grow up so much sooner than you should have that comes with that. So just sit with yourself, sit with your inner child, seek to understand, because it's going to help you grow and become healthier as an adult. Once we've healed ourselves, we can actually make some changes in the world, because we can actually influence some positive changes. So that was a lot to get off my chest. I'm sorry it took so long. I wanted to keep it kind of short, but that was a lot to unpack. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day, and take some time. Sit with your inner child. Be compassionate and understanding. You're not going to regret it. All right. I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one.